Our kids are not our own. It can be a scary thought, but ultimately, our children are in the hands of the Father. This week, we talk about what it looks like to be ambassadors of Jesus to our kids rather than the owners of them. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the Olive Shoots Family Podcast, where we talk about family and parenting, homesteading, and the things God is leading us towards. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brittany. We've been married for 3 years, have one little boy, and just got our first piece of land where we plan to build and start our homestead. We are passionate about the family unit and getting back to the basics of the way God created us to live. We have big dreams and are learning what it looks like to pursue those dreams while first trusting God's leading.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey.
So Nathan and I have been reading through a book called Parenting by Paul David Tripp, and it's just sparked a lot of conversations between the two of us, and we haven't got super far into it yet, but the very first, I guess it's just the intro, starts off just by talking about the fact that as parents, we shouldn't necessarily view our kids as ours, and we know that they're God's and He gives them to us to steward, but then often they're our kids. So sometimes I think we forget that it's God that blessed us with that, and we are gifted with the opportunity to raise them, but we should be doing it in a way that honors Him at all times. And it was just a good reminder, and there was just a lot of language that he used that we're going to kind of talk about, just that, like I said, sparked more conversation between us. But one of the scriptures we wanted to start off with is Psalms 127:3, and it says, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward." And that's a verse that he talks about in relating to just remembering that children are a gift from the Lord. They are a heritage from the Lord. But that verse is right before the "like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth." And that's a verse that we've kind of
latched onto as family.
So it's neat that that's connected. But yeah, and one of the first things in the introduction that he talks about is just this idea of being an ambassador, having an ambassador mindset when raising your kids, or having an ownership mindset. And so that's kind of just to define that real quick before we kind of share some of our thoughts. He defined ownership as your parenting is motivated and shaped by what you want from your kids or what you want for your kids. So an example would be you're raising your kids with the whole purpose of, this is what I want them to be when they grow up, this is what I want them to do, this is what I want them to do for me. And so all of your discipline and all of your conversation is centered around that. That would be the ownership mentality.
It's like the stereotypical version of that is the parent who is raising an athletic son or daughter and pushing them to the extreme in a sport that the kid doesn't necessarily even enjoy doing or want to be a part of, but that's a dream of the parent, and so they're pushing their kid in that direction because that's what they want for them. And then you find out when the kid is 20 years old that he hated it and is mad at his dad or mad at his mom for forever pushing them in that direction.
Yeah, and I don't think those parents have bad intention in pushing their kids in a certain direction, but I don't know, sometimes we miss the...
Yeah. I think that's the stereotype of it, but there's also even a well-intentioned form of that where, we want our children to like the things that we like doing. Mm-hmm. I just went on a camping trip, backpacking trip this weekend, and I want my kids to like going camping with me. I want them to experience that with me. But if I if they don't like that, and one day I'm just like forcing them to go with me, like at some point that's just going to be me telling them to do what I want them to do rather than learning the things that they enjoy and participating in those things. And so it's easy to that's kind of a silly example, but it's easy for us to want good things for them, even if those things aren't what they should be going for, even if they're not bad.
Yeah. And I don't think that, we're going to kind of talk about this and bounce back and forth between the two words. So before I say anything else on that, I want to go, the ambassador mindset is, it kind of like painted the picture of thinking of an ambassador for a company. So if you sign up to be an ambassador for a business, your job is to represent whatever the business stands for, regardless of what you think, and to do what the leader has told you to do. So it doesn't, like, if you go in there and you start talking bad about the company, or you just have your own idea of what you should do and start doing it, and it's not what the leader has told you to do, then you're probably not going to get to be the ambassador anymore. Like, they're probably going to fire you, because your job is to represent the company well. And so that's kind of like, as ambassadors with Christ in parenting, our job is to faithfully represent the message and the methods and the character of the leader who has sent us to parent our kids. So to faithfully represent the message, methods, and character of Jesus as we parent our kids is our job. So, like, going back to the ownership, I don't think it's wrong for us to have ideas or wants for our kids. But when that trumps us faithfully representing what Jesus has called us to do, then that's when it becomes wrong.
Right.
And one of the things he mentioned was that he said, I don't think there's very many parents that are just straight up ownership all the time, or that are straight up ambassador mindset all the time. Like, we kind of bounce back and forth between both of those, because it's difficult to not want your son to want to backpack with you, even if he doesn't like it. Like, you want him to like the things you like. Mm-hmm. And that's not a bad thing. But whenever that trumps seeking what Jesus is calling out in him and seeking what Jesus is leading him in, then that's when we're taking ownership instead of leading with Jesus.
Maybe a better example of that is I think it would be really cool if one day our kids served with us in children's ministry. Mm-hmm. I think that would be a really cool picture. But as we lead our children into serving, it's not necessarily leading them into the service that we want them to serve in, but rather listening to what God wants them to serve in. And maybe that's not children's ministry for them. Maybe God is leading them to serve in a different area, not with us. Yeah. And so if we just push that area of something that is good because that's what we want to do, then we could be pushing them into something good, but not what God is calling them to do. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of ownership versus ambassadorship in even something that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, so like you said, we can want good things, but then it's not the best thing.
It's not what God wants.
It's not what God would want for them. Which maybe isn't the best thing, because if it's if serving in children's ministry is a good thing, but if it's something we're forcing and not something that God is leading in and not something our kids are desiring, then really we're kind of causing them to want to push back in serving and want to push back against being involved in church, because we're encouraging them to do something that they don't have a heart for, that they're not in. Right. And if they're not in it, we can't force them to be in it. Mm-hmm. We can't force their heart to be there. And so in reality, I think we're kind of setting them up to want to push back against serving, mm-hmm. if we're making them serve in a way that they're not feeling called to serve in.
Mm-hmm. I think using that as an example, if we were to approach that with an ambassador mindset, recognizing that service is something God calls us to and wants us to do, that it's approaching our relationship with our kids in the same way that God would, that God knows our hearts and he knows who we are. And so when we take the time to get to know our kids and we get to know what's on their heart and the things that they like to do and the things that they value, then the service that God is calling our children to will naturally come forth out of the things that he is putting on their hearts. And so it may not be something like, hey kids, come serve in the way that we like to serve, that we're comfortable in as parents, but that our kids may not be comfortable or enjoy doing. It may be us going outside of our comfort zone to go and serve with our children in the way that God is leading them. And that's a way to approach those type of things in a situation where, as God's ambassadors to our children, we are going to love our kids the same way that he does. We're going to try to understand their heart and understand their calling in the same way that he does, and draw out their calling in the same way that he does in us. And it's just that ambassador role of, how does God love me? And then I'm going to love my kid the same way and point him back to God through that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of the things that I wrote down of us, like that he specifically quoted, Paul David Tripp said, parenting is not first about what we want for our children or from our children, but about what God in grace has planned to do through us in our children. And I thought that was just really powerful and convicting, because kind of like what I started with earlier, but it shouldn't be about our desires for our kids or from our kids ever. It should, any of our parenting, any of our frustrations from our kids that we're trying to address, our mindset and everything should not come from wanting them to do something differently just for us. It's God, it's what God has planned for us to do, for God has planned to do through us in our kids. So like he used us, he's using us to bring this child into the world, which we've already done. And then now it's our job to let him continue to use us to train them and to grow them in the way they should go, so that when they are on their own, they are doing the same thing with their kids and still following after Jesus. But one of the things we've talked about a lot is that, like I already said, oftentimes we go back and forth between those ownership parenting style and the ambassador parenting style, because we recognize that God gave us our kids and that they are not ours. But in the day-to-day moments, in the little bitty things, with right now we have a toddler, and so it's like just, small parenting of, how do we work on whining? How do we work on asking please instead of just whining for something? And then just like, how do we teach for him to learn the word no and what that means? In those small moments, sometimes we fail to put that ambassador parenting into practice, and we kind of fall into the ownership in the moment. And so we often need to kind of just discuss that and go back to how would Jesus respond in this, and are we seeking Jesus in how we should parent, or are we just trying to do it all on our own?
Yeah, and the ambassador mindset, one of the most difficult things about it is when you approach parenting as an ambassador, then you are surrendering control, some level of control, over to the Lord, which is a good thing, but it's a difficult thing, especially when we're talking about our kids. And so parenting as an ambassador means that you have to give up some of the control so that others can be blessed by our kids, so that our children can be blessed by what the Lord wants for them, not by what we want for them. And that's really hard to do, to give up that control, because that's part of the role that God has given us, is to lead them and to guide them and to have that ownership and responsibility over their life. And yet, as he's given that to us, he's also said he is the ultimate authority. He is ultimately the one who is guiding and leading and directing our children. And so, just like in a lot of other things that God does, he gives us a role and a responsibility and a job to do, but it's one that we have to rely on him to fully do well. And that's just, it's just giving him and surrendering to him the control that he has given us, which is just a really beautiful picture of what worship and giving is, just in general, but specifically in parenting. It looks like giving to God the control of our children's lives that he has placed in our hands in the first place.
Yeah, which is, like we said, difficult to do, but it's also like a relief at the same time when we do that, because we know it's our job to train them, to parent them. Like, we're not just saying, well, it's all up to God, we'll just sit back and do nothing and God will do what only he can do. Like, obviously, yes, that could happen, but we still have a role. It's not God gave us these kids and now it's our job to just sit down and expect God to do everything else. Like,
right.
He has to work through us. Or I guess he doesn't have to. He chooses to work through us. And so we still have a big role in that. But ultimately, if we are parenting with his authority, then the result is ultimately up to him. It's not up to us. So, like, knowing that God has the ultimate authority, and that any authority we have with our kids, in our community, wherever, any authority that we have is only because God allowed us to have that authority. Gave it to us in the first place. And he gave it to us. Yeah. Then it's a relief to know the end result is also up to God.
Yeah.
Do you ever have trouble turning your mind off when your head hits the pillow or getting a good restful night's sleep? We've struggled with that often lately. Between dreaming up new ventures, the long to-do list, and just winding down from the day, it can be difficult to get the much-needed sleep. We've started using Earthley Wellness Goodnight Lotion, and it has made a huge difference. It has helped us to fall asleep faster and to feel more rested when we wake up in the morning. It is rich in magnesium, which has loads of health benefits, and helps promote restful sleep and normal sleep cycles. You just apply a small amount, 10 to 15 minutes before you go to bed, and pregnant or nursing mamas, it's healthy and safe for you too. It also helps relieve those leg and muscle cramps that seem to happen in the middle of the night. We can't recommend it enough. If you are interested, click the link in our show notes and check out all the other amazing Earthly products while you're at it. We have grown to love this company because they carry natural, organic, made in the USA products that actually work and are safe for our little babies and kiddos as well. Yes, the link does help support our family. Earthley is generous enough to give a small percentage back to me if you use my link. So thank you so much in advance for your support. And we hope you like the Goodnight Lotion as much as we do.
And one of the questions that we kind of talked through is, what does it look like to always, knowing that our authority does come from God when we parent our kids, what does it look like to always back up our discipline with what God says? What does it look like for our kids to know that we didn't just pull this out of thin air, we didn't just come up with some consequence, or this isn't just a rule because we want it to be a rule, but they know that we parent with the authority God gave us, and that when we are giving them discipline or rules, or how this is going to go in our household type thing, that it backs up. We can back that up with Scripture. We can back that up with what God says is best. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of one of the things we talked about, is what does that look like for them to know that we are backing up what we're saying with Scripture.
Yeah. And I think it starts with just scripture. And I think it starts with, letting them know the stories and the commandments, of the Old Testament, of Jesus, of Paul saying, children, obey your fathers and your mothers. Okay, so that is from God. That is God speaking to children, saying, "Hey, I've given your parents authority in your life, and I have given this to them, and you need to listen to them." And again, I think it's really important to say this just because so many people have been hurt by this, but it's so important to not take those moments and abuse them as authoritative, that you are using the Bible as like, do what I say because this is what you have to do. And that can be abused pretty easily. And so there's a responsibility on the side of the parents to say, as we talk about ambassadorship, as when I'm talking to my kids, that, hey, I love you, and the reason we're telling you these things, the reason we're teaching you this, or the reason we're correcting this behavior is because God has put us in your life to show you what it looks like to follow him, and why to follow him, and how to trust him, and that God loves you so much and wants you to live the best life that you can possibly live. And here's how we do that. And so it's in those moments, it's not just saying like, do what I say because I said so, or do what I say because I'm in charge. I'm your dad. You have to listen to what I say. And it's more difficult, but it's taking the time to point back to our authority actually comes from God, and we trust God. And so we think it's important that you trust God too. And here's what that looks like in a practical aspect.
Yeah. And I think one of the most important things that we can do in parenting our children is to be an extension of God's grace to our kids. So whenever, and we can do that in so many ways. And that doesn't mean that they never receive discipline, because I mean that's biblical too. God says he disciplines those that he loves. And so it's not like he shows us grace upon grace and we never suffer consequences. Like, yes, he does show us grace upon grace, but there are consequences to our actions, even as adults. And we know that. And so it's the same thing with our kids. We show them grace as an extension of that grace that God has given us. But it doesn't mean there's never consequences.
Right.
But I think there's also, like, I've just heard stories from other parents, and I mean, even in this book, of there's times where you can be super intentional and just have really impactful moments of the kids know they screwed up. They know they messed up. They know they're about to get in so much trouble. They know they're going to get grounded or whatever that's coming. And then that moment right there, just pausing and saying, listen, you know what you did. We know what you did. And you know that because of what we've already discussed in this house, that your result is probably to get grounded, right? Or your result is whatever we've decided, And they know that they see it coming. They know that's what's coming. And then in that moment to say, but this time we're going to show you grace. And this is because this is what God did to us. He took it away. And so this time you're not going to get grounded or whatever. Like we not that that's an every time thing, because they would figure out that they just would never get in trouble. But I think that there's intentional moments that can happen where it's just like, wow, because it's very practical for them and on their level to see, I deserved to be grounded because I disobeyed and I went behind my parents' back or whatever the deal was. And they knew what they deserved, and they knew that what they did was wrong. And then to step in and just be able to show them just a very vivid picture on a small scale of what Jesus did for us can just have a really big impact. But then I think that also can play out just in small glimpses of showing them God's character in how we live.
Yeah.
And just letting them know that even when they mess up and even when the consequences come, we still love them. We still show them grace. We still show them glimpses of God's character, even though there are consequences for their actions.
I think grace is not the removal of consequence, but as parents, I think we can show that through our emotion and through our reaction as well. And one of the images from this book that I loved and latched onto is of a father who is on his way. He's like walking down the hallway to get onto his children. They're not listening. They're like being too loud. They're being too rowdy. They're doing something in their room that they shouldn't be doing, that they know they shouldn't be doing. And the father is he's walking down the hallway to their door to go open it and yell at them and get them in trouble, get onto them. And as he's walking down the hallway, he thinks of himself before our Heavenly Father, that he recognizes in his own life how many times he has messed up, how many times he has made a mistake, and how the Father has handled that in his own life. And it's with grace upon grace upon grace upon grace, and not removing the consequences in his life, but continually loving him and showing him that love time and time again. And it's that reflection of how God, our Father, has shown us grace upon grace in our lives, that when we take that mindset of grace and that attitude of forgiveness that the Father has given us, and that when you reach the end of that hallway and you open up your children's room to get onto them, then your tone is different. You're no longer shouting and angry at them, but you're understanding, you are loving, and you are caring. Maybe it goes from screaming at them to, hey guys, I thought we said we weren't going to make any more noise anymore. So hey, I totally understand you guys are having a lot of fun, but we're not going to do this anymore. And the consequence of not allowing them to continue whatever they were doing still exists. And maybe even as they get older, it's a recognition that, hey, you know what was going to happen. We've already talked about, if you came home after your curfew, you weren't going to get to drive. So you're not going to get to drive this week. But hey, I just want to hear you out and just want to understand of what was it? Why were you late? And it becomes a conversation, and it becomes a conversation of care and of mercy and of grace, rather than just in that moment, I'm frustrated with you as my child breaking my command of coming home late and not listening to me when I said, don't stay out past 11. And that emotion, that anger emotion, kind of becomes lessened when we recognize God has given us grace. So instead of showing anger, I'm going to be understanding, firm, but I'm going to be understanding and listening to my children rather than just getting mad.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the things that you just kind of mentioned, and we've mentioned it several times, is knowing what our kids knowing what the consequences and us knowing what the consequences for specific actions before we get into that moment. And I think that helps with the conversation. It's not you just yelling out some random thing, and it's also not you having to make your kid mad because they didn't know what was coming. It's you knew that this was the discipline, you knew that this was the consequence if you broke curfew, or you knew that this was the consequence if you were being too loud for the 6th time, or you knew that this was the consequence for whatever, so now it's going to happen. It's not yelling, and then throwing out some random consequence. And I think that relates to another thing he was talking about was short-term gain versus long-term transformation. And one of the things in that is if you're not intentional in your parenting, you don't have those intentional consequences lined out, your kids aren't aware of the result of their actions, then it's easy to throw out short term, I don't have much time to deal with this, stop talking. Or I don't have time to deal with this, go outside and don't come in till dinner. Or you're not playing with your brother for the rest of the day or till dinner or whatever it is. Just separate and quit playing with each other. Like, that's short term. The problem's solved. We don't have to worry about it till it comes up again. But long term, did we transform anything? Did we change their lives? Did we make them learn how to communicate better? No. And I think we often make those decisions, like I said, because of lack of time. It's easier just to separate. It's easier just to tell them to be quiet. It's easier just to tell them to do it because I said so, than to take the time to explain why, or to take the time to teach your kids, these two siblings that are fighting, how to resolve the conflict. But in the long term, if we spend the time up front, it saves us time in the long term. Mm-hmm. And it transforms their relationship. It transforms it transforms their life. It's not just anytime I get mad, I'm supposed to just walk away. Like, sometimes, yes, it's wise to walk away. And sometimes you can walk away, but you still got to come back to that person at some point. And so, and obviously in marriage, that's a huge thing that you learn in the first year. If you've just walked away from friends or from fights your whole life, and then you get into marriage, you're like, oh, well, I can't walk away. Like, I committed here, and I have to come back to you and face you at some point. So have I learned how to do that? Have we learned how to have that conversation? And I think that's, not that we've ever just walked away, but that's definitely something that in our own marriage that we both have had to figure. We're still figuring out, but in that first year, it was like, okay, well, we're still going to see each other in 10 minutes, so how do we deal with this?
Mm-hmm.
Is your baby or toddler teething? I'm always looking for natural products to give my baby instead of over-the-counter medicines that often contain artificial colors, flavors, added sweeteners, and other non-essential ingredients. Earthley's Teeth Tamer has been great. It's made from whole cloves and catnip, which works to reduce pain and swelling and provides a feeling of calmness and relaxation. My baby loves the taste of it, and I can tell it gives him relief. That's a win-win in my book. It's even effective for adults. It can help with pain from cavities, root canals, wisdom teeth removal, braces, and more. It's non-GMO, made in the USA, and made with 100% organic ingredients. If you're interested in Teeth Tamer, click the link in the show notes and check out the other amazing Earthley Wellness products while you're at it.
It's like parenting the quick and easy solution in that moment versus like finding the root of the problem and tackling the root of it. The image that comes to my mind is like if someone had a cough and every time they coughed, they took a cough drop, and then for a straight year, they're coughing every single day, but they just keep taking a cough drop every day. And so the symptom is covered up. The cough is covered up, but it's continual. It's every day, every year, rather than instead of just taking the cough drop right away, that quick and easy solution, it's maybe going and asking someone or doing the research or figuring out, okay, what is it that's making me cough? And that's a super silly and meaningless example because not very many people have a cough for a year straight. But when that's anger, when our kids get angry at their sibling, the quick and easy solution is, all right, you two separate, go to your room, and then they're fine. They cool down in half an hour or an hour, and they're fine with each other again. But then the next day, it happens again.
And it's more escalated.
And then it happens again the next day. And so it becomes really easy to say, I don't want to deal with this. Just go to your room. And I know in 30 minutes it'll be fixed. But taking the time to slow down and to get to the heart issue of what is making you guys so angry at each other? And what's really going on here? Why is this happening? And parenting that instead of just parenting the symptom of y'all are fighting, stop the fight.
Yeah.
It's you guys are you have a heart issue here, and let's work on this heart issue that's going to transform how y'all interact with each other.
Yeah. And I think that investing in those early years of these silly things, and maybe, I mean, arguing is a thing that's not only early. Like I have multiple siblings. I I know that arguing with your sibling is like forever. You not forever, but you know, you're always gonna have things that come up that you disagree on. But that's something that early on, if you catch and you're training and you're finding that heart issue, and then you're also teaching them how to resolve their conflict in a way that is beneficial. It's not mad and angry and shoving and running off. It's, okay, this is why you hurt me, and this is why it made me angry. And then they can begin to try to understand and change their actions and work in unity towards that instead of getting mad. Then the next time they're mad at each other, hopefully it's not over the exact same thing, you know? Hopefully they're having a different conversation. And I just think that in those early years, taking that extra time with the toddler and whining, and teaching him to say please when he's 1-2 years old, and you're like, does he even understand? I don't know if Emerson understands, but he's 15 months old, and we're working on please, and I have to say please, and he'll say it, but it's something that hopefully over time, when he's older, he has manners. And if I wait till he's 10 and I've never taught him please, I've never expected him to say please, and I'm like, well, now you're 10, you should be saying please, quit being so rude. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, we would expect a 10-year-old to not be demanding, because they're plenty old enough to say please and thank you, and to not just whine for food or whatever silly little thing. But if they haven't been taught that, and we haven't been intentional about that from the beginning, then no, we can't expect a 10-year-old to know that. And even though they should, like we think a 10-year-old should know this thing, if they haven't been taught it, then no, that we can't expect them to know it. They shouldn't know it. And so that's just one of those, like, taking the time at the beginning, even when they might not understand it, and develop that in them over time, then that should catch on. And I think that another thing to say, if you have a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old and you feel like you've messed up, you feel like you haven't been intentional about something, it's not to say that 10-year-old and 15-year-old can't learn, and that you can't teach them because you didn't teach them when they were 2 or whatever. But it might take a little bit more time and a little bit more redirecting, because they've developed a habit opposite of the habit you wanted them to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so one of the things Brett mentioned kind of at the beginning is developing language in your family around this type of thing. That, with our 15-month-old, he probably will not understand what the role of ambassador is for his parents. He knows mama and dada, and ambassador is a little bit tough to get out right now. And so the language that we have surrounding, our role as parents is mostly just mom and dad love you. We love you. And God loves you. And one of the things that I like to do when laying Emerson down at night right now is just to say that Daddy loves you, and Mama loves you, and God loves you, and there's nothing that you could ever do to change any one of those things. And for him, as a 15-month-old, that is a way, in ways that he can understand, in language that he can understand, to say that we are ambassadors of God, that we love you, but it's God who loves you even more, and there's nothing you could ever do to change that. But as he gets older, to have consistent language of our role and our authority as parents, that's really just been given to us by God. And I think that's unique to each family, because we don't talk to our kids the same way. Our kids don't listen in the same way. They hear things differently. And so just for you guys listening, that just to spend the time to think through and develop, what does it look like for us to, what kind of language, what kind of words do we actually need to use so that our kids understand that God is really the one that we look to, and that even though mom and dad are in charge, that we're in charge because God has placed us there. And even mom and dad have to listen to God. Like we are still under his authority. So, and it's just finding the right words and repeating those and pointing back to those over and over again.
Yeah. And even if your kids are 1 or just born, or you're about to be a mom and dad, they're not actually here yet. Like, these are all conversations that would be beneficial to go ahead and start having, because it's language you can start implementing now, even before they understand. And honestly, they're able to understand and obviously hear a whole lot more than they're able to speak it from an early age than we understand. Like, we don't recognize how much they actually can soak in, because they're not able to verbalize that yet. But they are listening, and they are starting to understand even before they're able to say, yes, I understand that. And so starting that language from 6 months old, from a newborn, from 1 year, however old they are, when you don't think it makes a difference, it does. And also being on the same page and having those conversations with your spouse up front, and just being prepared. And we've had numerous conversations and then at the end of it, we're like, well, that's probably not relevant for another 10 years, but, and our minds and conversations might change 20 times in the next 10 years.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah.
But it's still beneficial to have those types of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think something we have to be careful of, if we're constantly using that language of we are ambassadors, God's the ultimate authority, that we're going to have to be quick and cautious to recognize when we get that wrong, because we don't want to be portraying something and saying it's of God, or for them to think that it's godly when it's not. And we don't want that to become a consistent, like, this is how they punish me, and this is how they yell all the time, and they get mad when I keep doing this. And we've also told them we're ambassadors of Christ. Like, that's not representing Christ. And obviously we are going to mess up, and we're going to get it wrong, because we're not perfect. And so I think that's just like, if we're going to use that language, which we want to use, then it's also just an added step of we've got to be quick to recognize when we get that wrong, and admit it, and tell our kids, this was me, this was my flesh, this was not God, and I messed up. Like,
right. And I think it's in those moments too that again is an opportunity to point to being ambassadors, that when you fail as an ambassador of representing Christ, then you get to go to your kids and say, look, I messed this up, and this is not how God is. God, when you do something wrong, he doesn't get angry and yell at you like I just did. So I'm sorry, and I apologize. God, he loves you, and he won't fail you. He won't mess up the way that I just did. And so it's even in your failures, even in your mistakes, even when you get angry and blow up, even in those moments, pointing it back to, well, God will never fail. God will never hurt you or hurt your feelings or mess up in the same way that I did. And just pointing back to God's goodness and his authority in that moment, even when we get it wrong.
Yeah. And then I think our ultimate, like in all of this, our ultimate goal, not ultimate goal, another goal is to lead them to start to view their own lives as ambassadors. Once they accept Christ and they are choosing to follow him, they become ambassadors in their relationship with him as well. And it's not ambassadors in parenting their kids yet, maybe, if they're not that old yet. But it's still that ambassador role. Their job is to represent Jesus in all that they do, and to represent his message. And so then it becomes our job also to lead them to view their own lives in that same way, and also to be able to learn how to be ambassadors with him in parenting their kids in the future. Like, I think that's definitely an aspect, but it's not, we're going to teach you this so that when you have kids, you can start to practice it. This is going to be your role when you have kids, but you're also an ambassador right now, and your job right now when we go to Walmart and we're buying groceries is to represent the message of Jesus in how you treat your siblings in front of other people, and how you treat mom and dad in front of other people, and how you talk to other people, and how you talk about Jesus to other people. Like, their goal is to represent the message and the character of God. And so then it becomes, like, after they're saved, then it becomes a conversation of, well, this is how you just treated your brother. Was that representing God's character? Was that a representation of what Jesus would have done? And it's not in a condemning way. It's in a, you're an ambassador now. You've got you have a higher calling on your life than before you were an ambassador. And it's you're gonna mess up just like we've messed up. But you should ultimately be coming back to, no, that wasn't what Jesus would have done. Jesus wouldn't have got angry at his brother the way I just did at my brother. And so it's a way for us to model it in a very, like, realistic and viewable way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and lead them in discovering those things. If the qualities of Jesus are kindness and mercy and love and grace, then leading them in opportunities of showing kindness, leading as ambassadors, leading our kids to be ambassadors of showing kindness to other people. That as we come and we apologize to our kids for messing up and getting angry and saying something we shouldn't have said, that they have opportunities to give us grace as our children, and that they wouldn't have had that opportunity if we don't go and apologize to them, or finding moments of showing mercy to maybe another kid who wasn't very nice to them, but we're going to go out of our way and we're not going to get angry back, but we're going to show mercy in this moment and be nice to them, even though they don't deserve it right now because they were mean.
Because you're an ambassador. Like, that's a cool thing. When you sign up to be an ambassador for a company, I mean, I would bet that most of the time you think that company's awesome. You fully support their mission. Like, there's something about it that drew you to want to represent them. And sometimes you sign up for an ambassador for free. Like, you don't get anything from it. You're just like, I believe in what you are doing so much that I want to be a part of it and share it as well.
Right.
And then you're proud to be an ambassador. Like, you're proud. You're going to post it on social media that you're an ambassador for whatever, or you're going to go be spreading it around that, hey, have you bought this product? They're awesome. I'm their ambassador, kind of thing. And it's that, I don't think we think of that as Christians with that word of in the same mindset very often. And sort of train that to grow that in our kids and be like, listen, you're an ambassador now. And that means that, like you just said, we get to lead them in opportunities to show those. And then also we get to recognize and call them out, like, hey, that was really nice of you to do. That really looked like Jesus. Or the way you just helped that elder person carry their groceries to their car, or the way you just offered to pick up the things that just fell on the ground from your friends and you didn't have to. You could have just kept on walking. Like, that was really nice. That's something Jesus would have done. And just recognizing what they are doing that is being a good ambassador is going to encourage them to want to do that more, for one. And two, it's showing them, hey, things you're already doing, you're doing it right. That's something you're doing right. Good job. So that whenever there is those consequences and they do mess up, it's not that all they hear from us is that they mess up. It's not going to be great for them to hear that they messed up. But they also know that we're also going to tell them when they did good, and that we're also going to call them out when they are being good ambassadors. And that's a proud role to have, and it's a proud name to have, like, as a Christian.
Yeah. So wrapping this up, we just want to say, in the best way possible, in the nicest way possible, that we hope you were as convicted as we were hearing these things, that viewing parenting as ambassadorship rather than ownership changes the way we respond and the way that we go into conversations or moments of parenting our children. And we hope it helps to transform your families and your homes as well. We're so thankful for you guys. If you're not following us, check us out on social media. Follow us to keep updated on all the things that we have going on at Olive Shoots, and check out our website when you get the chance as well. We're just super thankful for all of you guys listening, and just thankful for what God has put on our hearts that we get to share it with you all. So we'll catch you next week. See you guys.